Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of CVtv Workshops. And today I'm here back with Mike Paletta. Mike, you've had quite a year this time around, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been a crazy year from losing some friends like Jake, wiping out the tank behind from a heater accident, winning a MASNA award, and traveling, doing a lot of calls and stuff. It's been it's been a mixed year. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
I'll be grateful when it's over.
well, it's one of those things where you can't appreciate the good without the bad. You wish the bad wasn't there, but
Yeah,
the bad gives you that perspective of making the best out of what you got left?
yeah, no, it makes you appreciate it. I mean, losing Jake at such a young age. I mean, Jake and I were good friends. We talked for once or twice a week, probably for the last 8 10 years. And what's interesting is I first met Jake when I was giving a lecture in North Carolina, and it's probably late 1990s, early 2000s. And this tall, gangly kid comes up to me with a copy of C-Scope that has this Pseudochromis friedmani on it. And he comes to me and he says, I get into saltwater because of this article. I'd like to autograph it. And that was the first time I met him. And we stayed friends literally since then. And then I wrote for Reef Builders for 3 years, and we talked literally 3 or 4 times a week during that span. And even once I stopped writing for him and I have always talked to each other relatively often. And I mean, it's interesting is I would plan my calls because I knew if he called, it would be 2 or 3 hours. We would be on the phone talking about everything from his new favorite oddball corals that he found to how we were managing some new pest we encountered, or how we were optimizing this, or just the general state of the hobby. I mean, that's what I'm going to miss the most about him. And that's what I consider Jake like the voice of the next generation of reefers. And to lose him really left a big hole for all of us friends of his, but also for the hobby, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, it was sad to hear the news, especially for somebody that is, for anybody, but especially for somebody that young. Um, Considering that he was younger than us, so that
Yeah,
doesn't
he was
bode well for us.
significantly younger than me. And I mean, to be
He was
honest,
younger
that's the
than
biggest
me.
I've ever seen him for the past couple of
Yeah,
years. He got married, had a baby on the way. I mean,
I know.
all the tags were doing great. All his corals were doing great. I mean, he was just in a really good spot. And for that to happen, just leaves a hole in everyone's heart. And I feel badly about it because they're really,
Absolutely.
anytime I do something or look at something new, I think of Jake. I mean, we
Mhm.
were talking literally the day he left, and what I'm happiest about that is my last words to him were thanks. So I think that's the most fitting tribute I can have to him. Is the last thing I said to him was thanks.
That's all. That's good. That's good. You know, I'd, you know, just we want to extend our condolences to Windsor, obviously, and the entire reef builders community and family and everybody else because that was a great loss. It was a great loss to the hobby. He's going to be sorely missed.
Yeah,
So,
he'll be remembered forever. And like I said, his corals are what people remember him by because now they're getting widely distributed, and
mhm,
he'll always be known as Jake's Blue or Jake's Green in his honor. So that'll be good. But like you said,
yeah,
I mean, as with everything, you have to have the good with the bad. So there have been some good things that have occurred as well in this past year. Uh, one of which was I got to visit Andrew Sandler's polar reef a couple of
yes,
times, and I wrote about it for Coral Magazine. They actually listed me to write about it, and I went there thinking, okay, this is just going to be kind of the just a bigger version of a reef tank, but it was so much bigger and so much better than any reef tank I had encountered up to that point, public or private. And to see this amazing tank in this guy's home, seeing his hands on, I mean, obviously he doesn't jump in the tank every day. He has a job that he does, and he has a team, and people criticize him for that. But he's behind all the decisions of what goes where, how they're doing certain things. I mean, he's for all these years, and I've known him for a relatively long time. He still has the same kind of passion that all of my close friends have, and that's very nice to see.
that's. I mean, it is his system is just insane, and I've never had the pressure of going there. Looking forward to one of these days. But I've been sorely impressed by that system. It is just the magnitude of it, I can't even imagine what the the overhead of maintaining a system that size is just, it just baffles my mind.
Well, when you see the tank itself, it's just awe-inspiring because the number of fish, the number of rare, when I say rare, one of a kind hybrids, one of a kind color morphs, one of a kind we've never seen before fish in this tank, along with these big, massive corals. I mean, when you see a coral in my tank, I thought I had a fairly big tank at 500, and it's this big, and it looks pretty big. But in his tank, he has corals this big, and they look like this big. That's what blows your mind. Plus, like his fish are all humongous and big. I mean, I have like Bimaculatus anthias in my downstairs tank. They're what I consider normal size, 4 to 5 inches. In this tank, it's probably 8 to 9 inches, and it's big and fat and fully colored. I mean, and all of his fish are like that. I mean, he has a school of orange tilefish, a school of blue tilefish, a school of wrought iron butterflies, a school of Summivatus butterflies. Just fish, one, you never see in a school. Two, you never see them in a reef tank. Three, you never see them doing the normal behavior. And to keep and maintain them, the amount of thought that went into the engineering, the design, and the application of all of the equipment. Because everyone thinks, okay, he has some kind of secret formula. His secret formula is he does the same thing that we do. He just does it on a much larger scale. Whether it's the protein skimmers are bigger than you and I fit in them together and not touch the surface, or a sulfur reactor that's as big as an old telephone booth. I know a lot of the people watching this have no idea what a telephone booth is, but that's how big the sulfur reactor is.
You know, and the thing, it's the research. It's the amount of time and planning that he put into it. It's not, I'm not saying that, you know, doing things by the seat of your pants is not okay, but you have a much greater success if you spend the time to research, to learn, to find out what works with what fish goes with what corals go with what. And then it allows them to have a system that beautiful. Because if you had fish that were chasing each other or eating each other, then what's the point? You got to know what you're doing.
Well, in terms of knowing what he's doing, he also has a full wet lab and a quarantine system second to none. And he has now mastered what antibiotics, which fish can tolerate, which ones they don't, how to deworm them, how to keep. I mean, it's a minimum of 3 months these fish go through quarantine because he doesn't want to add a fish that adds a disease that wipes out, you know, countless beautiful fish. Because a lot of them are totally irreplaceable. So he's absolutely meticulous in the quarantine of the fish and the corals. And if he sees a fish, Rashid, his team leader, has to go into the tank and literally catches them out with a net and treats them outside of the tank. Now, you and I have caught fish in a normal size. When I say normal, 90 or 120 or even a 500-gallon tank, we've caught this fish. Okay. Imagine trying to catch a fish in a 17,000-gallon tank.
Oh my God! Can you imagine? No. Let's bring it up to another level. Let's imagine catching a wrasse on a 17,000-gallon tank.
Well, he his 4 or 5 fish recently had eye flukes, and they were on the bannerfish, and they were on his Picasso Desjardins tank, which is one of the most incredible fish you'll ever see. You have to look at the pictures on Polar Reef of that fish. They caught the bannerfish, but because the Desjardins was favoring that one eye, he was staying out of the net, and they never were able to get him. Fortunately, I believe the fluke eventually resolved itself over time, but he was very worried about it. And that's the thing. He's just like us in that regard. In that if a fish is sick, he's as worried as we are. Like I remember when the first Emperor Angel I got came home and it was sick. It was really bad out of the bag. And I remember staying up all night and moving this fish by hand in the tank until it finally came around. And I had just gotten married at the time, and my now ex-wife, my wife back then, knew and thought I was totally out of my mind. But that's how he is about the fish. He cares about them just as much as we thought. Like, oh, we can just get another one. No, he cares about each and every fish, whether it's the rarest fish or it's a common anthias in the tank.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So you were there, you did a blog, or I mean, you did a video. I know that, right?
I did a couple of videos where I asked people on Facebook and on other places the questions that they had for them, and they came up with some good questions. And I would sit them and ask the questions, and it was off the cuff. He wasn't prepared at all, and he always had good answers about it. I mean, like the most interesting is, where do you see this in 5 years? Because if
Yeah.
the corals grow at the rate that they're currently growing, he's going to have literally an ocean of overgrown corals. Because you and I have both been out on reefs where you see table corals that are as big as pianos. Well, he has a
Yes.
dozen table corals in that tank. What is he going to do when they overgrow everything and are the size of pianos? So, I mean, they're already mastering the art of fragging them before they overgrow each other.
Okay.
So
So it's proactive about it.
already
That's
in management phase. I mean, and the other
good.
interesting
You know, that's the one thing.
go ahead, sorry.
No, go
The
ahead,
other
please.
interesting thing is when I was doing the research and asking people for questions, obviously you get trolled every now and then. And one of the people said,
Mhm.
"This is terrible that he did this. He took all these corals out of the ocean." The reality was he found out people that had corals that were too big for their tanks, that were overgrowing them, or people that were getting rid of their tanks, or people that just got tired of whatever. And he would buy their big, oversized corals, and that's what he put in the tank. They all came from hobbyist tank. So one, they'd already been in captivity, which probably also helped, but they were already big and beautiful and healthy. So that went a long way, because when I went there in June, the tank had only been up for 18 months with coral. It was fully stocked. And then when I went back 5 months later, you could see those, and you could see how meticulous he was in placing, still moving stuff around.
Wow. Now, you and I know that, and we've talked about this before, that there's something about colonies that moving them is not as simple as people think. Actually,
Right.
moving a colony is actually more difficult, and you have less of a chance for success than if you were to move a tiny little frag.
Agreed, but you have to look at it from an evolutionary standpoint. In the wild, if a colony is moved, it's basically a fish has knocked it off, or a storm or something has knocked it. It's fallen down and it dies. However,
Mhm.
corals are always getting brushed, and little frags fall. So you would think, from an evolutionary standpoint, a frag falling would have a much higher chance of likelihood of surviving than would a colony, just because it makes more sense for them. So in that regard, he was meticulous in how he placed them. He saw the tanks they came from. So he didn't try to,
Mhm.
shift something from, 500 par to 1500 par. Everything
Of
is
course.
close to the same kind of levels, and he acclimates things very gradually.
Okay. Wow, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Because I mean, that's the, people ask me, it's like, hey, can you send me a big coral? And I'm like, well, you know what? And I truly believe that, I don't have a scientific background in it, but I truly believe, like you said, it's like there's something that as soon as that piece of coral, that small piece of coral gets broken down, I feel like there's something going on that makes it puts it into an overdrive, puts it into something that is like it's going to protect itself more, and it's going to have a better chance of rolling through the sand, through the rocks, until it lands into something that it where it feels where it actually is happy and it's able to root.
Well, in that regard, I actually did a small study, my own little study. When I was growing a Paletta pink tip, and it was growing like a weed, and I had so much of it I could experiment with it.
Mhm.
So one of the experiments I did was I took 6 frags. 2 were planted like we normally do, like trees upward. 2 were planted flat on the thing, and 2 were planted tip down. So I wanted to see what was going to happen. The
Mhm.
ones that were planted flat grew a base around them very quickly, and then sprouted up multiple sides. The ones that grew like a tree grew up, but they encrusted, but they didn't grow nearly as quickly or as fast as those planted down. And the ones planted tip down all basically died.
That is interesting because the chances. I mean, let's be real. The chances of a frag breaking and doing it, you're trying to encrust and spread out as many branches, as many things as you can to increase your chances of survival.
Right. But see, the problem though is for the people that are doing it, if they sell frags, the frags laying on the side, want that. They want a coral that looks like
Exactly.
a coral that's sitting upright. So that is why the hobby has evolved like that. But when I'm fragging stuff for myself or I'm growing it for myself, I plant them flat, make sure they're clean. Also, you have the tip away from where bacteria is on the plug. So it's not as likely to get as infected, the tip away. So what I do is I dip it, I take the frag, mount it on its side, paint the tip with a little bit of iodine, then put super glue on it, and then just let it go. And it grows much faster. When I say much faster, after 6 months, you'll see a significant difference between when it's planted like a tree and when it's planted flat. For at least 2 or 3 of the corals that I've tried that for. Because I've also done it with Valley Green Climber, and I've also done that with a couple Milliporas.
Well, there you go, people. Now you know it's like the one of the tricks from coming from Mike Paletta. Better chance of growing them sideways and then treat it with iodine on the tip, so that will work better. And put the tip away from where the bacteria will grow and settle. So that's the trick.
I would like to see other people trying this to see if they get the same response that I do, because we're all kind of indoctrinated. Oh, you have to plant it so it looks like this. Yeah, it looks great when it's planted like that, but it grows much slower. Yeah. And if you're trying to grow things fast, mount them on their sides and see what the difference is. Or if you have 2 of the same thing, mount one like that and the other flat. See the difference after 6 months. See how
well. Also, you also have to remember, in terms of light, when you mount it on the side, you have a bigger surface area where the light's falling. If you mount it straight up, then depending on your light source, you may just be getting it straight from down and nothing from the side. So I mean, it does, once you start putting it together and putting your bullet points, it does make sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's something we should be doing, but nobody does it. I mean, it's just
yeah.
I'm
exactly.
doing it more and more. Yeah, I'm doing it more and more and seeing the results. I mean, fully encrusted plugs on the flat ones versus a little bit of encrusting and a little bit of growth upwards. So it all depends on what you want.
And also, if that wasn't enough, shipping wise, the coral is probably going to do better shipping if it's mounted on its side than it's mounted vertically by a tiny little surface area. So
yeah,
I mean, we've
all gotten a pack of frag plugs where half the plugs were knocked off the glue. If you glue them down this way, and actually you'll see faster encrusting. So I mean, I hate the people that just hack and frag and ship it immediately. So I would prefer you saw some encrusting. So if they laid it down, they make it encrusting fast enough that they don't have to do that hack and ship immediately.
Exactly. Well, you know what? I mean, it's one of those things where it's the demand has set the way we're doing things right now, because people, like you said, people want this vertical straight up. Anyway, so Andrew said
it's doesn't it we like how it looks, but it doesn't make sense in terms of what the total benefit the coral is.
This is a little bit of a personal opinion. A 3-branch does not constitute a colony.
No, that's
still a frag.
Yeah.
It's not a mini colony. It's not a nano colony. It's a frag.
It's a frag. No, actually, there was Dieter Brockman and I also did some analysis of coral frags and survivability. He did a much more extensive study than I did. Basically, what he found was frags a 1/4 inch or smaller have a 90% mortality rate. 1/2 inch or smaller have a 50% mortality rate. 3/4 of an inch or smaller have about a 25% mortality rate, and 1 inch or smaller have about a 10% mortality rate.
If we go by that, a lot of this online retailers out there, probably the frags are too small.
I agree. I mean, I've gotten frags literally like the tip of my pinky nail, and by the time they would grow, I said this at MASNA. When I look at corals and they want 250 for this frag, I don't go, oh, because it's 250. I look at it and go, oh, it's so small. I will probably be dead before it actually grows into anything. So,
well, you and I are old school, which means that, remember back 20 years ago when we gave frags, it wasn't the size of this. We gave frags and it was a big thing with like about 4 or 5 branches, and we called that a frag.
Yeah.
And I would just cut it off and say, hey, Mike, here, have this. You know why? Because shit's going to happen, pardon my French, and I'm going to lose the tank, just like what happened. We'll talk about in the back of your softies. So you know what? 6 months from now, I want to be able to come back to you and say, hey, Mike, can you please send me a frag of that one because I lost it?
Well, that's one of the things. The first article that Jake actually asked me to write about was the reefer's code. And one of the things I talked about is how we traded with everyone and we banked all our
Yeah.
corals. And it wasn't all to make money; it was to enjoy the hobby and have fun. And that's one of my concerns: is I see less people having fun, and I see everybody think, "Oh, I got to buy this $500 coral. If I can grow it, sell 2 of them for $250, I'm even on this."
Yeah.
I realize it's an expensive hobby, but I also know I saw colonies back then that were brown, but were this big. They still look beautiful. Now you want to have color. You have blue lights. Even the Stuber coral, the Stuber acropora, that was just brown, is now green and blue and purple. So with lighting, everything will be more colorful. You don't need to buy the most expensive thing.
Correct. Correct. I mean, if you have if you just pay attention to the water quality, trace elements, you can make an inexpensive coral look amazing. It's just a matter of it. Just every coral out there is beautiful if you just know what to look for. If you
Yeah,
just if you just look at the right thing, it's like you can't be expecting every coral to be a jawbreaker or whatever the names are. It's there's I mean, myself, I like the old school corals, the ones that are like they've been around for a long time. Some of them are brown, some of them are green, but there's a particular beauty that I appreciate that I don't think I wish that most people would.
well, that's what I'm trying to acquire blue corals, because blue corals have become the redheaded stepchildren of the hobby because the blue lights wash out the blue coral. But
Mhm.
I run halides for 4 hours a day on my 600-gallon tank. I can
Oh
see
yeah.
the blue corals, and the blue corals shine. And in blue lights on, they're still spectacular, but nobody has like hoaxamize and alberhensis and levelized, the deep blue corals that we used to have. Few
Mhm.
people have them, but not that many. Now they've become piece of the ocean or Frankie's neophobia,
Mm.
but they're basically blue in that vein. I mean, that's the other thing that drives me nuts is the names of the corals. We used to know genus and species. Now it's somebody's name, and 5 different vendors got the same coral in from the same mariculturist in Indonesia, and each one has a different name. So what does a name matter anymore? It used to be there for marketing or for, okay, this came from so and so or this came from so and so, but now names don't matter that much, and everyone has to have a name. As people want corals that are upwards like this, they also name coral. Because I've been in enough
Mhm.
frag swaps where people would ask the name of a coral and say that doesn't have a name. And they go, and they go, what about this one? They go, oh, that's Joe. Oh, yeah, I have to have it. You know,
And it happens to be the same thing, probably.
yeah. And it blew my mind that the name coral, because it was named, and it could be named by anybody. It could be named by the
Mhm.
kids, this guy's teacher, anybody. Well, that's the name. And the names don't make a whole lot of sense anymore.
I was just having a conversation with somebody about this because millies, everybody calls them millies now.
Right.
Everybody calls them millies. But if you really look at millies, I'm gonna say 75% of the millies are not millies. They're actually technically prostatas.
Prostatas, yeah. And
Exactly.
there are actually
But people don't know.
prostatas that they have listed as millies too.
Yeah, and people don't know that it's actually it's it's oh yeah, pink millie. No, it's not a pink millie. It's a pink prostata.
Yeah,
If you look at the differences, there's a substantial difference between a prostata and a millie, besides just the shape of the coralites, you know.
right.
But
No,
they good.
but they don't know the name. They don't know that there is a difference in genus species. It's all
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is. It's now is everything is tenuous, millies, or torts.
no, everything
Yeah.
is rainbow.
Oh
Everything is
yeah, sorry.
rainbow gonies, rainbow blastos, rainbow millies, rainbow tenuis. That it's all rainbow.
Okay, okay, so the rainbow back in the day for me was when we first got the Manipara ondata, the
Right.
ondata, because they had a kind of like it had a pink to green, a little bit of reddish, and some white polyps, and that was rainbow 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, we were as we were talking about frags, I may remember when I was in Europe, when they trade frags or sell frags, their frags are all still this big. They don't
Mhm.
Photoshop them. They don't super saturate them because their mindset is if you do that, you're not being fair to the customer, and they will ostracize the people that are doing that. So their corals are bigger and true to the color. I mean, there are a lot of vendors where I have gotten the corals and they look exactly like the pictures,
Hmm.
But I have also gotten corals that I don't know what dimension they were in because they look nothing like the. I mean, nothing.
I I find myself going to stores and asking them, "Would you please turn the whites up so I can see what the coral actually looks like?"
Yeah,
Because my tank, I'm old school, which means you can see it right there. My
yeah.
tank is
I can
not
see
blue.
how white it is.
My tank is a white with a hint of blue because I like the blues. I like to see the blues. I make the blues pop. It just feels like nowadays people are trying to unblue a blue coral to make it look something else. You know, you
Yeah,
got a blue coral. Oh no, it's got to have pink. It's got to have yellow. It's got to have all this stuff in there. What about just a blue coral? Um, uh, so I just think that to each his own. You know, at the end of the day, you're the one purchasing the coral. You're the one looking at them. It's just that you know, being in the hobby for such a long time, it's funny how things have evolved. And I bet you it's a pendulum because you know maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years. I don't know how long it will take, but it will come right back.
I don't know about that because I think because they have marketed the colorfulness of the corals, that has what gotten a lot more people into the hobby. So there are more
True.
people in the hobby now than ever. My big concern, though, is with coming recession, when people don't have the extra money and they're also
Ah,
paying extra for energy to heat and cool and take care of their tanks,
of
are we
course.
going to have as many people in this hobby 2 years from now as we do now? Or are a lot of people going to get out of the hobby or not get into it? Because that's my other concern. I don't see a lot of younger people getting into it because it has gotten cost prohibitive. It's more
Yeah.
a hobby for people 25 to 40 that are at peak earning years rather than for people. Well, I mean, I started when I was literally 5 years old and I started
Mhm.
saltwater when I was 17. I don't see 17-year-olds in the aquarium stores buying saltwater anymore. I mean,
You
literally,
can't.
no. So, I mean,
You can't. I just
I look at it like baseball. If you look at the average age of the fans watching a baseball game, it's like 52 years old. Young people don't have the capacity to sit there for 3.5 hours and watch
mm,
the slowest sport there is. The same token, I don't see 17-year-olds plucking down $200 for a coral frag this big. One, they don't have it, and two, they don't really have the patience to grow this into something for the most part. Having had
correct.
teenage kids, I know what their capacity was. It was always a video game or something that was immediate gratification. A reef tank
Mhm.
is not immediate gratification. If anything, it's prolonged pain before that it's
It's
pleasure.
so then I should be okay because I'm a diehard Cubs fan,
Yeah.
which means that I'm used to prolonged pain.
Well, you got another 114 years to go, so you'll
Exactly.
be around
You
here
get
next world.
one good year when everything grows, and then everything just goes downhill after that.
Yeah. Now, one of
I
the
can
other
say the same
things
thing about the Pirates.
Well, one of the other things we were talking about is, well, so what did you learn at Andrew's tank? And one of the things, besides how meticulous he is I learned about how important doing proper ICP testing is. Because the one thing I've seen him talk, not give a cuss on this, the one thing that people take for granted is without adequate testing, you don't really understand what is being taken out so that you can add it in proper amounts. We always tend to assume, okay, this and this. Like I used to run a calcium reactor. The problem was the amount of alkalinity and calcium the corals would consume would wax and wane depending on when they were booming and when they weren't. And
Mhm.
I one tested all the time, and as you know, I have an alkatronic that measures that. But adjusting that calcium reactor to keep it always straight is like keeping plates on a stick. You're always doing one. You're adjusting the flow, or you're slowing down the CO2 level. You're
Right.
changing the bubble rate. There's always something to fool around with. Now I've gone to dosing 3-part, but I don't have to dose magnesium much because I still do a significant amount of water changes.
Hmm.
But doing that and seeing the alkatronic, I can shut off a dose or increase the rate based on what my alkaline levels and my regular every other day testing of calcium are. And in
Hmm.
that way, I've gotten things much more stable. Uh,
Hmm.
when I saw Julian Sprung's tank about 2 years ago, he has a dose that was dosing literally once a minute for, half a milliliter, 2 milliliters. It was keeping his levels absolutely perfect. And when you saw the growth rates in his tank, they were
Yeah.
phenomenal. The only other person that I've ever seen growth rates like that in was Sanjay's tank. But the other thing I learned about is understanding you need to know what's going in and what's coming out. And Andrew does ICP tests at least once a week and sometimes twice a week to see exactly what's going on with his trace elements. Having a tank that big, you think you wouldn't need to be adding trace elements, particularly since he does water changes.
Oh, God.
But with so many corals and so much going on, what's interesting is sometimes he's adding 9 bottles of a trace element. Sometimes he's in 10 milliliters of a trace element. And you're wondering, what? That's all you need of certain things. And that's why I've become much more a fan of ICP testing than I was 8-9 years ago when it came out. Because 1, I think the ICP tests have gotten better. 2, I think we have a much better understanding of what the numbers mean. 3, thanks to guys like Claude at Fauna Marin, we can understand what the ratios mean between some of these. That it's not necessarily just a absolute number, but a comparison of X versus Y versus Z, and then all those have to be in correlation with each other. Because if you have 2 high and 1 low, certain things will happen. If you shift it around, other things will happen. So we're starting to understand that. And 4, we now have access to every single individual trace element, which is the big thing. I mean, as I told you probably the last time we talked, I know, which was almost a year ago, one of the things that drove me nuts was adding a trace element mix that had everything all mixed together, because nothing is in the right ratio. Fortunately, with reef moonshiners and Triton and Fauna Marin, they now have calculators. So you get your scores back, you plug the numbers in, and then you know precisely how much of trace element X and trace element Y you need to add, how long you have to take at it, because you don't want to dump it all in as a bolus. And it gives you much better ideas. And by doing that, I'm seeing much better results in my tank, but also in other people's tanks that are following this procedure. I mean, there's a whole group of reef moonshiners network that are adding things much more precisely than we ever could have imagined, 30 years ago, 40 years ago when we started.
It feels to me like this is like an evolved version of, or maybe back in the day, Zeovit was kind of like a very basic way of doing it, where you could measure and you would still rely on looking at the tank and looking at things. Now you actually have the ICP that is actually going to give you the numbers. But before we get into the ICP, for the newbies out there, for the new people, what is ICP? What is it?
It's basically, I forget what the precise term is. It basically does electrically measures the amount of certain elements, for everything from major trace elements like nitrate, phosphate, calcium, magnesium, down to minor trace elements like vanadium, zinc, rubidium, a myriad of different ones. And some of those trace elements are in the parts per billion range, which we never could have imagined made any difference. But for something like, say, vanadium, if you want to grow tunicates or sea squirts, you have to have an adequate amount of vanadium in the tank. Rubidium, we're finding, is essential for some corals' health. I have found manganese to be one of the critical ones. Manganese and fluoride to be 2 of the most critical ones, in that fluoride seems to affect color. That is, if your iron and bromide are too high and your iodine's too low, even though it really doesn't matter what your phosphate nitrate levels are, you still may get brown corals. Manganese, I have found, is absolutely crucial for the long-term health of gonioporus, and also to maximize and optimize the coloration of coral. So I've been playing, plus I've been reading everything that Fauna Marin has, because they have very long explanations of each trace element. But I also went one step further. In the German version of Coral Magazine, 2 issues ago, they had the entire issue on trace elements.
Oh, wow.
So I got the digital version of that, and I have been gradually translating it, because they go even more in depth into the ratios of things. So
wow.
Because one of the other things that we're finding is, like, when I was at MASNA, I was talking to Greg of Greg's Corals, and who else was I talking to? 2 other people. We all had bouts. Actually, a lot had bouts with RTN and STN this year, and we couldn't figure out why. So we were comparing notes, And one of the interesting things we found is that when we had RTN or STN, the corals were very brittle. That is, the areas that were attacked, you could just literally snap them off. Even on the thick coral ones, they just weren't as dense as the healthy corals. And when I talked to Claude, he said, yeah, the problem typically is you don't have adequate levels of strontium. And when I went back and looked at when I was having bouts of this, indeed, my strontium levels in my tank were down. And in comparing notes with the other people, we basically found similar thing. So
same thing.
I now very aggressively manage and strontium to the tank. It is always, that's the other thing. For the past, say, 15 years prior to the last two, adding trace elements and adding things like strontium or magnesium or anything was kind of poo-pooed by a lot of people. You don't need to do this. There's enough trace elements if you do adequate water changes. There may be right after you do the change, but if the corals are thriving, they can smooth things. Like in my own tanks, for a long time, my nitrates and phosphates were always slightly high. Then all of a sudden, the coral started taking off. I could not manage to keep the nitrate and phosphate levels up. I had to start adding phosphate and nitrate because the corals were consuming them faster. And I fed the same amount of food. Nothing had changed. I still have a ton of fish in it. It was the corals were showing you we need these as our energy sources. So it's the same with the trace elements. Those are your limiting factors. And now we know, and we have means to test them by various things. One of the things I have just gotten, I have 6 different ICP tests, all waiting downstairs to when I have a free day, so I can fill them all, pack them all, take and send them all in all day, see how long they take, and see how much different they are. Because about a year ago, I sent in 4 different ones, and the results were, let's say, significantly different from one another. Particularly in the trace elements, where a lot of them just measured 0, and some actually measured them very well. So I'm going to be curious to see if, because at MASNA I talked to 4 of the manufacturers, and they all had said within the past 6 months we have improved our ICP testing. We have done better.
They got new machines.
The machines are now with people that do it all the time. So it's not just the machine; it's the technician running the machine, and it's also the algorithm they have for the machine.
And it's also the calibration of the machine too. You can't go back between fresh water and salt water, fresh water and salt water, because it'll just calibrate. So calibrating the machine to test, to calibrate it to match what you're going to be your bulk testing is going to make a huge difference in terms of in terms of the results. I've noticed that.
Yeah, in the early days they ran them on fresh water. Then they eventually went to salt water. Then they went to natural seawater. Now a couple of them are doing reef tanks as their base point. Because what's funny is people still think a reef tank is a small part of a reef. It has nothing to do with a reef, because the bio load on this compared with what's on a reef and how much water can wash across it. Literally, it's funny when you think of it that way. All it is our attempt to replicate, but it has nothing to do with an actual reef, in my opinion.
It's you can't compare the flows, the nutrients, the washouts, the coming back. It's like it's a huge ecosystem. You're talking about millions and billions and billions of gallons of water, of nutrients coming in, elements coming out, and everything. I mean, it's just, it can't be a reef. All we can do is measure what we got. I remember when you couldn't measure all these things. You had to look at things and kind of go by it, and it was difficult. You either had the way to read things and all that. I appreciate the ICP now. I know there's several companies. I know for CoralVue we have Fauna Marine ICP, and we also have ICP analysis. So you have a choice between the two of them. They're both good. I personally add manganese and iron to my tank in addition to my regular trace elements that I add because of calcium reactor. Because I also noticed that that my Gonioporas has started taking a dive and kind of receding to the point of that Goniopora syndrome, where they start not opening, they turn white until they die. And then I'm like, okay, better start doing it. Started adding manganese and iron. I've been adding manganese and iron, and you can see the Goniopora is just getting a new life. At the end of the day, for many years, we've had the the thought that we should strip nutrients. Nutrients are bad. Nutrients are bad. And I feel that you can take the nutrients out, but if you're taking the nutrients out, you have to replace them with something else. You can't expect me to stop eating and then be healthy at the same time. It doesn't work. I can stop eating the bad stuff and start eating good things. So the same thing with the corals. If you take the bad stuff out, you got to replace it with the good stuff in. You're putting your corals in a very strict diet where you're giving your corals only what they really need.
Right. Because I mean, I'm good friends with Jamie Craigs, and if you've ever read his PhD thesis, basically what it shows is the way we've kept corals up until the past 5 years was adequate to keep them alive. He then went one step further and started looking at the nutritional needs and their energy needs in order to reproduce. And that's when I started feeding, and I feed my LPS particularly very aggressively, and it has made a significant difference in the health of my euphyllias, the health of my gonioporas, my acans, every LPS coral. They now get fed 3 times a week. And like Jamie's system, my LPS system is a small 40-gallon tank, but it's hooked on to the 600-gallon total system.
Okay.
I feed the corals with all the water shut off with a little bit of flow. They eat for half an hour, and then I flush the whole system out, and the water flows right across carbon and right into the protein skimmers. So all the gunk from the corals is taken out. But I didn't realize how important the feeding was, because I assumed that it was important. But when I went to Italy for 2 weeks, I didn't feed the gonioporas. They didn't get fed for 2 weeks. When I came home, they were all looking sickly, all retracted, all pulled in. Came back and started them feeding 3 times a week, and so it's rather interesting that how much we've learned in the last 5 years compared to the previous 30, where we were just keeping them alive. Now we have corals reproducing. Now we have them growing at such a rate that we can pretty much cut gonioporas. And Jamie's even doing things like breeding sclimias and things like that. So there's so much we've learned, but there's still so much more we need to learn.
We don't know. Exactly. So what would you recommend in terms of ICP testing? You said that Adam Sandler tests once, at least twice or 3 times a week, but obviously not everybody, let's be real, not everybody has the financial means that other people have. So if you were to, be strategic about your testing, what do you think?
If I'm realistic about it, I would start off testing, get everything in the right level, and do the eye test to make sure everything's looking good when everything's at the right level, keep them at that level, and then realistically, I would test once a quarter.
Once a quarter. Okay, so
your ICP test once every 3 months, your tank's generally going to thrive and do well, because unless something stupid happens or you change something, nothing really dramatic should happen in 3 months. It usually takes 3 months for things to stabilize in a tank. Like when you move a frag, my rule is it takes 3 months for it to stabilize when you've moved it. So it's the same way there. If you have everything stable and good, it's going to take 3 months for you to figure out what's going on. And things should be relatively stable. If you tested 3 months and you saw trace element X, Y are way down, compare with what you're doing and when you dose them, then over the next 3 months you need to increase that. Then when you tested 3 months, they should be stable.
Okay.
Probably something else will have changed, because those limiting factors will be gone. So one other element will be a limiting factor.
Okay.
The thing with most of these trace elements they are not necessarily crucial to the total health of the corals, but they're what pushes the coral over the edge from being really good, phenomenal, growing in its optimum.
Stunning. Yes, exactly. And you're tweaking here. You're just like, okay, at the end of the day, you're adding chemicals that might make the yellows pop out a little bit. You're adding chemicals that will bring the greens out. And if you add too much of something, then the yellow becomes green or it turns brown. Right. So you're starting to be the mad scientist. You have this little Frankenstein that you're creating. And if you're walking a tight rope that, either way you can go great or bad.
Well, having worked in pharmaceuticals for 40 years, there was a term called therapeutic window. That is where below this level, things were bad. Above this level, things were bad. In this middle here is a therapeutic window when things would benefit. That's what we're trying to find with everything we add to the tank. That therapeutic window, that optimum level. Because I mean, I have kept magnesium at 1300, I've kept it at 1500, but I find the optimal is 1400. So I mean, there's a fine line because you go much over that. The same thing with like potassium. You go a little bit over the level you want it at, you start killing off corals.
Exactly.
So, that's why if people don't take anything out of this, if they're going to do ICP testing, before you do it, I suggest you read as much as you can on trace elements. Go to Fauna Marin's site and read all the trace elements. Read all the articles that are out there on the trace elements. There's lots of stuff on there. And then more or less jot it down because you're not going to remember it. Jot down, okay, I want zinc and this is the level I want it at. I want potassium at this level. Not just for your minor trace elements, but for your major trace elements too. Like strontium, potassium, magnesium, things like that. Know where your levels are and know where you want to be. Because that will pay big dividends long term. And that's what you're looking at. I mean, if you're looking at your tank like a TV set where you turn it on, don't have to do anything, you're in the wrong hobby. It's a constantly evolving process. So as long as you have the numbers down and you have an idea, don't chase them though. I mean, if your magnesium you want it at 1400, it's at 1250. Don't make it 1400 overnight. Take a couple of months to get it to 1400. Everything you do slow pays you benefits here.
Now, what about
coral fell into another coral, then move that fast? But other than that, there aren't a lot of things you need to do fast.
Yeah. What about, okay, so I know that I need to test every 3 months at least, to be realistic. Now, some people test. The only time some people test is when things are going bad. It's like, okay, I want to do that. I want to do that.
Things are bad.
So what do you recommend?
You want prevention is where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's for humans, but it's also for your reef tank. If you can prevent losing $200 corals and you spent $40 on an ICP test because you did it once a month, do the math. Do the testing. Like I said, the one thing I learned from Andrew that he's meticulous about is you don't know what you need to add till you know what's being consumed. ICP test is telling you what's being consumed, so you have an idea of what to add. So don't wait until you find, oh, my levels are all zero. Then it's hard to add things slow enough and enough to make a difference because it's going to take you 3 months to get to that level. So you don't want to be waiting 3 months to go, okay, I'm going to do my other test, and something else could happen. I mean, when you have RTN and STN going rampant in your tank, then obviously you want to find out why. Well, I mean,
of course,
in my case, I had a Arcobacter, a Vibrio infection followed by Bacter infection, and I had to treat the tank with Cipro. Once I treated with Cipro, all of a sudden I wasn't getting RTN and STN because from my ICP tests, the levels of everything were good. We couldn't figure out what it is. I talked to you the last time, I think, about sending stuff into Aquabiome. They came back and says, you had Vibrio, and now you have Arcobacter. Arcobacter is a more opportunistic pathogen than is Vibrio. Vibrio is everywhere. Arcobacter typically comes in after the Vibrio is wiped out. That's exactly what happened. I used low-dose Cipro and wiped out the Vibrio. Tank was good for a couple of months. All of a sudden, I started getting massive amounts of RTN and STN. I went and asked my friend who's a microbiologist, okay, what's the lethal 50? I forget what there's a LP50, I think is for what's the lethal dose, LD50, what's the lethal dose for 50%? It was roughly 6 times the amount of Cipro that I was using for Vibrio. So for the 600-gallon tank, initially I was doing 1 tab of Cipro every other day for a week. That wiped out the Vibrio. With this, I had to go to 6 tablets every day for a week to wipe out the Arcobacter.
Did it work?
Yeah.
Still waiting?
Well, it knocked up my ammonia levels rose. Not the lethal levels, but they rose, and the coral started consuming them. The fish were a little bit stressed from that. But what's interesting is redox potential went from 390 down to 310, and it took 3 weeks for it to come back up.
Wow.
So whatever it killed off, it killed it off, and it was in the water. And then when I had steamers and polyholders, eventually that took care of it.
Okay. Yeah, but you would have never you would have never known it if you didn't have an ICP test, because you had the ICP test told you everything is okay. Therefore, it's not an element. It's not a trace element. It's not phosphates. It's something else.
Right. I wasn't low on strontium. I wasn't low on this. Nothing made sense. And then I did the aquabiome, and they said, well, you have 2 strains of Vibrio that have been found to be pathogenic at higher levels. Okay.
And
I treated that, and then sent in another test, and it said, okay, you have a moderate amount of Argobacter. Well, Argobacter, when I did the reading, is very, very pathogenic toward Acropores.
mm-hmm.
So I had to treat it, and I had to treat it aggressively, because I got to the point where I said, okay, I'm either going to wipe everything out or I'm going to cure it. There's no in between. Because I had talked to Dan and Randy and Devin at ARC, and they said, yeah, we've had to treat with Cipro a couple of times, because a lot of these corals now that are aquaculture have Vibrio or Archobacter infections, and it's very slow and gradual. It's not like it's going to wipe out the tank. Sanjay had the same issue, in that the corals would all look good, then one would start to bleach halfway, and it would stop, and then it would come back, and then it would attack it again, and then another one over here a week later, and then another one over here, and we could never figure out what it was. It ended up it was a bacterial infection.
Oh, wow. Now, is there anything that you can do to prevent this from obviously, a lot of us get corals from stores and things like that. Is there anything that we can do to, besides acclimating or, anything?
There is what has come to be known as the Kung Fu dip. Now, I asked the viewers of this. I don't have it memorized. I have it written down downstairs. I used half a dose of Cipro, 10 drops of Lugol's iodine, and 2 other compounds. Oh, and hyper potassium. I dipped the corals for 45 minutes in this, and this has prevented any future infections of this.
Oh, wow.
You can buy fish Cipro online, and it's not that expensive. But that's what I do now when I get anything in. They all go through the Kung Fu dip now, because it was either they were all going to die eventually, and I was fed up at, or it was going to cure, and it did.
But I mean, but what I'm trying to get to in this with this recipe is that, yeah, use it at your own risk. But again, you're still only doing it on a frag that you just bought, that you're bringing into your system, especially if it's something that is maricultured, aquacultured. Is it a mariculture, aquaculture too, or no? Just aquaculture.
It's in both. I have seen it in a lot of the Indo coral.
Okay,
I mean, a lot of the Indo maricultures have it.
So it's in both, and if it's in both, then then it's definitely something that you don't want to bring into your system anyway.
Yeah, I mean, in talking at MASNA and some of the other shows with vendors and aquaculturists and hobbyists, I bet 50 to 75% of people have had an RTN, STN issue in the past year. And my guess is a lot of it is due to bacterial infections, which we know are only about now.
Exactly. I mean, it doesn't surprise me if we have a source of them and they're coming in. It's bacteria. It just keeps spreading until we actually treat it, or there's some kind of herd immunity, right?
Yeah,
that's virus. Yeah, whatever.
That's virus.
Yeah, that's virus.
Like that.
But bacteria. But yeah, you still have to treat it to kill it and stop it at some source. All right. So ICP. I also have heard from other ICP people, Claude, Steve over at ICP Analysis, Claude over at ICP at Fauna Marine, that you should also test when things are going really, really well.
Oh yeah, no, definitely, because that gives you the baseline that you can go in and say, okay, this is when everything was good. Now everything's not so good. How does this differ? It gives you an idea of how to balance those and bring those back up to the optimal levels that you want. As we said, with trace elements, a lot of them become limiting factors. If you don't have an adequate amount of element X or Y, that could cause problems. Like I learned with strontium, but like rubidium, molybdenum is also a big compound used by corals in fighting diseases, which we're only starting to learn about. As we talked about manganese, if your colors were better before and your manganese levels are being consumed faster, or it's precipitating out, obviously you need to add a little more often. I mean, as we said, this is all, the hobby is a constant learning experience. You're constantly, it's not a static situation where it's like this. It's always like this. And the more you understand that, and the more you can get it, instead of being like this, you can have it be like this. There's always going to
Hmm.
be fluctuations. The better off you are. It's never going to be like this.
No, it's never.
So, yeah, get over that idea. My soft coral tank is somewhat like that, but even that I had a major issue with that I talked to you about.
Well, yeah, it's you're never, for those people that say my tank runs at 9.5 alkalinity, it really doesn't. There's never a static number. Your tank runs between 8.5 and 9, something like that we're talking about. So
Yeah,
everything is arranged. So I think that's one thing that as in the last few years that I really appreciate is that people are starting to learn that you're not chasing a static number. You're
right.
chasing a range. You
Yeah.
have to be satisfied with a range, because you will never, ever, ever, ever attain a single static number. It's not going to happen.
No, well, what you want that range to be as small as you can, but understand
But
there's a
it
range.
will. But you understand that it's always going to be a range, and that's one thing that I've noticed lately, especially after since the alkalinity machines have been out for a few years. Prior to testing alkalinity, because we only spot tested like once a day or once an hour, people never had the thought that alkalinity swings during the day. As the machines came out, then people started to notice that the alkalinity swings back and forth. But I do remember at the beginning of that, when the machines came out, I had a lot of calls telling me, hey, the machine is not working because it tested 9.5 this morning and right now it's at 9.
Yeah,
And trying to educate people that's like, no, that's you have to unlearn what you've read, because this is the correct thing. You're never going to get a 9.5. You're going to get somewhere between 9.25 and 9, and you're hoping 9.25 and 9.75. That's what you're hoping,
right. You want to keep
or
it
less.
point. Your corals will do much better. I mean, it's the same pH. We used to have pH where you do droplets. You go, oh, okay, my pH is 8. No, do it. You know, every hour. I mean, I have 2 constant pH meters to redundancy, and
Mhm.
since I have gotten them and I've gotten my pH to never go below 8.0, the growth and the health of the corals is significantly better. I mean, even though it's 20 degrees outside, I still leave my windows slightly cracked at night. It lets a little bit of cool air in, but it gets a lot of CO2 out of the room. And by doing that, I have much faster growth and much more stable pH.
Now, we were talking about trace elements, and also we're talking about bacteria and disease. Have you noticed a correlation between lower pH and bacteria, or is it just
Oh,
mainly because of the health of the coral itself?
there's actually several papers on, because they're looking at acidification in the ocean, and while it also slows calcification among the corals, it also allows for more pathogenic bacteria to be around the microfauna and in the microbiome of the coral and the mucus. So when you have lower pH, you're much more likely to have pathogenic bacteria and other in the tank disease. And that's one of the reasons why they're assuming in certain areas where acidification and lower pH, which is already down from what I've read, 0.1 or 0.2 already, that they're already seeing significant amount of diseases because it allows for the pathogenic bacteria. Vibrio prefer a more acidic than a alkaline. So the lower you go, the more Vibrio tend to take over.
Yes, and it's funny because you've seen over the last year and a half, 2 years, an uptake on going back to Kalkwasser.
Yeah. I have
Kalkwasser.
said that was one of the things I learned from Andrew. Andrew does his Kalkwasser every night. I dealt those Kalkwasser gradually throughout the day, and that has also helped keep my pH higher and also lower some of my phosphate levels in the tank.
My tank right now, you see right there, and I can hear it. You probably can hear it because it's got a noise surrounding suppressing, but I can hear my brrr. It's my FXSTP Camor pump there, because I dose Kalkwasser 24/7.
Yeah.
It's drip, 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 drip. I have a calc reactor, probably put like about a scoop and a half of calcium. I mean, I only have a 210-gallon tank. Scoop and a half of, cup and a half of Kalkwasser in there. And then every 10 minutes, that reactor turns on for 5 seconds. Keeps out that calcium, that Kalkwasser, just comes right back down, and keep dosing it. It helps me keep my pH up. Like you said, it precipitates phosphates. And I mean, and maybe that's the reason why corals, even back in 20 years ago, we knew corals love Kalkwasser. And
Yeah,
it's not Kalkwasser itself, but it's what Kalkwasser attains that they really like.
yeah. I mean, Alf Nilsson in his early articles, he introduced Kalkwasser, and Stuber, that it's quote unquote part of the Berlin system, along with live rock, metal halides, Kalkwasser. I mean, those were three of the main points of the Berlin system in a protein skimmer. Those are the four main pillars of the Berlin system. So, I mean, the more we change, the more we go back to the old things that work. I mean, because I know a lot of people now that have gone back to using Kalkwasser on a regular basis. I do that along with the dosing. I mean, initially I had to lower the amount of part 1 and part 2 going into the tank, but it's not it's an inexpensive way to add it and maintain it.
Yes, I would recommend if you read online, because everybody, you should read online, but if you read online, just put a little asterisk right next to using Kalkwasser as a top off.
Yeah,
it gets a little tricky. I would say keep your top off, or see how much water your top off is, and then get yourself a pump, a low rating, low flow pump, and add just Kalkwasser enough to make up for your for evaporation. Because if you do Kalkwasser on a top off, you're just dumping a whole bunch of 12, 13 pH water into the tank within 15 seconds, and then you stop for a long time, and you're going to have a lot of spikes.
well,
So
yeah, the problem with that is if you're just doing your top off, you're hoping the top off balances out with the amount of Kalkwasser. It's not. I use a single channel camera pump, and I have that program so that my pH never drops below 8.0.
Okay.
If my pH 3.0, the camera pump comes in and kicks in a little bit of Kalkwasser.
Okay. Yeah.
Very.
I have the same thing.
Yeah.
Except I also even push it even further, where I actually have it also reading my alkalinity.
Okay.
So because the alkalinity, because the Kalkwasser also helps with alkalinity. So if my alkalinity is too high, then go ahead and shut it off. If my pH is too low, then go ahead and turn it back on. But I've tuned it to the point where my Kalkwasser is pretty much running 24/7 all the time, because I'm right with it. I'm right where I need to be, where I'm just maintaining it. And that's what you want. You don't want to, I mean, yes, to me, you don't want to be turning on and off, on and off and off. You want to be able to keep it going, which is
Right.
gives you the best result.
Yeah. No, mine's set to run for 30 seconds to a minute every hour, and in that way I get the most. But if something kicks in, there's a second pump that kicks in for a minute if it drops too low. But doing that, it rarely ever turns on that I ever hear it or see anything come out of the container. So I have things relatively balanced that way.
Now, going back, everybody new, especially if you're a newbie, Kalkwasser will take care of alkalinity and calcium. It does not take care of your trace elements. So please don't take this as a replacement to what we were just talking about. Even though you're doing Kalkwasser, you're still adding trace elements, you're still doing your ICP, you're still testing everything, and you're still going to have to, most likely, you're still going to have to add individual elements to make up for whatever your corals are consuming the most.
Right. You still got to do ICP testing, because this is a major element. This isn't a minor element.
This is a minor. This is not a minor. So let's talk about we've talked about ICP. We've talked about the trace elements. I like what we do. We said test, do your ICP every 3 months at least. That's a reasonable
every 2 to 3
reasonable ask. 2 to 3 months. We've also said do ICP not only when things are bad, but do ICP when things are really good. And again, Mike, you said it enough. You said enough. We spent $400 on a frag, yet sometimes we kind of turn and toss and turn to spend $40 to test the water that is keeping the $400 frag alive. So it's kind of like, when you really think about it, guys, it makes sense. It's common sense.
And we've all done it. I mean, I know everybody. I can wait another week to get the ICP test. That's $40. But I just bought in 6, $200 frags, and you're going, jeez.
Well, I mean, I've done it with hardware. I mean, it's like, okay, you buy the corals, you got this tank, and then you buy the cheapest pump you can find to keep that tank alive, and then you go on vacation for 3 weeks.
Yep.
It's that, it's you're playing that Russian roulette, and you're likely going to lose.
Yep, you are, because the reef gods know when you go on vacation, that's when they're going to punish you. It's just how it is.
They're waiting for you to. They're waiting for you to check out, clock
Yep.
out, and they're like, "Okay, we're coming in."
It's been that way since the beginning of the hobby, and it's never changed. I can guarantee that it's never changed. Yeah. Now, speaking of
that,
issues, yeah, we'll get into why this tank behind me has totally changed from the last time we were here. The weakest links in the hobby are shipping, particularly with FedEx, who now loses 5 out of every 6 boxes that come to me, or in the still the heaters. I mean, I have an expensive heating system on this tank. This is in a sunroom. Shouldn't have to run most of the time, but when I was away on vacation, one of the sensors popped out of the water. The heater kicked on and it put the water at 94 degrees for at least 2 days. And what's interesting is 120-gallon soft coral tank, which was a soft coral tank before, all of the big corals died, all of the small fish died, all the small corals survived, all the big fish survived. I do not understand anything, and I fully accept that. That's what I came home to. We're all melted giant leather corals and sinularias, and all dead small fish, and all big fish were fine. The blue-faced angel, the Niger trigger, the yellow tang, the mimic tang, all great. Anything smaller than those, put little tiny leather. Pardon?
Oh, I was going to ask, and what was the culprit? Besides the heat, I mean, the heat. The thing popped out, the heater. What happened?
The sensor popped out for the heater. It's not glued in place, so that won't happen again. But so basically, I took everything out. 120-gallon water change. Took out the blue-faced angel. Took out the Niger trigger. Cleaned the rocks. Put them back in. Fortunately, in my frag tank, I had a bunch of soft corals. I bought a bunch more soft corals, and I've restocked it. I learned the hard way that I could not keep mushroom anemones, which are the simplest thing in the world, in that tank, because the blue-faced angel would eat them like popcorn. So now I have some relatively rare mushrooms in the tank that I love. The biggest fish in the tank now is a yellow tang. There's only half a dozen green chromas. Eventually, it'll be like 25 green chromas, and a school of orange anthias, and maybe half a dozen other odd fish. But it will be, to me, the ultimate soft coral tank with zoanthids, mushrooms, sinularias, and leathers. All the leathers are polyped out all the time now. Nothing. Two leather corals used to polyp out. All the rest are always closed. Now
they're all out because the angel's out.
Happy. I'm desperately looking for the true weeping willow leather. That's the last leather I want to add to this tank. I have a Godzilla mushroom coming that I'm putting in the tank. I have a Frankenstein mushroom to put in the tank, and then I'm just to go. It gets fed, automatically fed, TDO and New Life Spectrum food 3 times a day. I feed Russ's from American Reef his gel food a couple times a day, and everybody's fat and happy. The nitrates are 20, the phosphate's 0.1, but there's no algae in the tank. And I even did something crazy. I don't know if you can see it or not, but I'll show you. I even have substrate in the tank, which I have not had in the tank for 20 years. Yeah, there's substrate now because it just really makes the corals pop.
It does. That reflection just kind of helps. I get it. I mean, I don't. Yeah,
this is still a sunlight tank, so even though it's winter in Pittsburgh, we get sun 2 days a month from October through March. I know that once we start getting sunlight in here, because what's interesting is I talked to you about this, where I treated my downstairs tank for Sarcothelia with fendibendazole. And before I did that, I took all the snails I could out of this 100 and out of all the other tanks and threw them in here because I had been battling some algae. There is not a speck of algae in this tank now because of how good a job all those snails did.
Did they snails make it?
Oh no, they made it here. They didn't make it downstairs with the fendibendazole.
No, I meant through the temperature, through the.
No, they all died too.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah, they 94 degrees is, I've found that the max that they will take for 2 days.
Yeah, for 2 days. No, it's me being a hydros guy and, kind of develop the product, that we do have on the hydros heating, when you add a heater to the hydros,
Right.
most controllers out there ask you for one temperature sensor.
Yeah.
So give me one temperature sensor and I'll base the heater on that temperature sensor. Now with the hydros a few months ago, because I've heard somebody had something similar, we ended up adding a second temperature probe to that, what we call preset or profile.
Right.
So the hydros now will follow on a heater, will follow the highest temperature reported by any of the two sensors. So in this case, you would pull one sensor, or the one sensor comes out and the other one stays in, then the hydros would have followed
Right.
the sensor
Shut
in
it
the
down.
water.
Yep.
Because the one outside the water, it would be colder because the ambient is cold, especially during the winter time.
Right.
So that's what we've done. And some people do the Inkbird thing, but it doesn't matter what controller you're using. I'm partial to hydros, but it doesn't matter what controller you're using. The one thing you have to do is you have to make sure that you have a temperature sensor, a heater that has its own controller. And now,
Right.
Mike, I can guarantee you're going to add a second temperature sensor
Oh, yeah.
to that tank just in case.
Yep. No, that's the other thing I learned from Andrew. He has redundancy in every system, whether it's having a second backup pump or having two skimmers or having. And I have been a big advocate of that. And in this case, this is the one time I didn't do that. And
Well,
to be honest, I was devastated when I lost this softball tank. But actually, it's a blessing in disguise now. 6 months later, where the blue face angel is gone, the gone, and I can actually enjoy the movement of the softballs in the tank.
yeah.
Which I couldn't really enjoy before. Plus, to be honest, they had grown so big. I mean, there was a single area that was almost a foot in diameter with a stalk. That was putting out enough nasty compounds that a lot of other corals didn't do well in that. So I'm not going to let that happen again. But I am enjoying the leather corals, the zoanthids, everything else in this tank now, and particularly the mushrooms that I couldn't enjoy before. So
that's fantastic.
There's sometimes from something bad, something good happens. And
Absolutely.
we go to the next topic that we talked about, and that's Mike treating Sarcothelia in the downstairs LPS tank. For those of you that don't know what Sarcothelia is, it's blue clove polyp, and it is an encrusted kind, grows in kind of a mat, and it grows over anything it can, and eventually smothers them or irritates them.
I have that. And that is one of the things that I was like, when you said that, I was like, oh, I want to know what he did, because I'm sick and tired of it.
Yeah. And getting back to what we started on, was talking with Jake. Jake is the person who told me about using fendabendazole. And my last comment was him, as he told me to dose was thanks. And I dosed it, and I'll give you the good news. It killed the Sarcothelia. You're supposed to keep it in the water for 3 days. Killed all the Sarcothelia. Killed all my vermitid worms. Killed all my Asterina starfish. All my snails. Killed my abalone, which are also eating all the algae. Irritated all the Montipora caps to where 3/4 of them died. Killed off a couple of tenuis, for whether that the other stuff dying, the toxins killed them or whatever. So it worked. And the reason I didn't use fendabendazole is Prazipro was the drug of choice for killing things like Sarcothelia or Xenia or any of the things that overgrow and encrust. And it works phenomenally well, but it stays in the rocks for a very, very long time. It has taken me 3 weeks, 250 water changes on the 600-gallon tank downstairs, 5 changes of the carbon reactor, and 4 poly filters to finally get it out. And how I know I got it out, I keep bringing snails from this tank behind me and putting them in downstairs where there's some algae growing and seeing if they survive. For up until I did the last change this week and change of poly filters and carbon filters, not a snail survived more than 12 hours. Now I have a snail actually climbing up the glass, so now I can finally add a significant number of snails to that thing.
Wow. Wow. So
and
it's
even further evidence of how much this stuff accumulates in rock. when I was doing that, I took off some of the rock to clean it and stuff, and I decided to take out this big, huge rock of zoanthids, which is the big main rock in the very back of the tank. I took this out, moved it here, and put another piece of live rock in the tank. Rinsed off the rock, scrubbed it, took everything, all the algae and everything else, just left the zoanthids on it and the rock. Put it in here. Immediately, the Cispicillaria started to melt, and the blue xenia that I've had for 8 years, I lost half of the colonies of it. It just kept wilting and wilting. So
because of the rock.
From the rock, from the fenbendazole that was still in the rock.
Wow.
So I have since done 4 carbon changes, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and roughly a 50% water change in this tank. And that has finally gotten the fenbendazole out of the rock enough so that the Cispicillaria was dying. The little tiny specks that were left have grown back.
Okay.
And the xenia in the back has grown back.
Wow, that's I don't know if the I don't know if the medication is better than the disease.
That's I actually just wrote about that. I don't know if the cure was worth the disease, but the Sarcothelia was so bad in my tank, I could not keep acans because it would grow in between them and cover them over, and I was constantly having to take it out. It was bothering the gonioporas at their base. It had just got so out of control, and I had.
And this is for everybody. This is the little clove polyps that are everywhere nowadays. The tiny little clove polyps. So here's one thing that I've done, and I've noticed this, and I was going to talk to you about this also when you raised this, because for a long time, I've actually, my way of taking care of phosphates in my tank is using lanthanum.
Oh, I had problems with lanthanum.
So I've used lanthanum, but my way of lanthanum is like, again, small stability. Yep. So instead of waiting a month to add lanthanum, instead of waiting a week to add lanthanum, or 3 months, what I do is my system tests for phosphates every day. Okay. Every day. And then every day my hydros grabs that information, knows how much I want to bring it down, and adds that amount. So I'm only adding on a 200-gallon tank, 210-gallon system. At most, I'm adding 1 milliliter of lanthanum, if that much. Sometimes it's way less than that. So it doesn't affect the way it
doesn't precipitate out and irritate the gills of the corals like it would.
Exactly. Yeah. But the one thing that I've noticed is that my clove polyps get annoyed by it. Yeah. And they don't do well. Before I added lanthanum, I was getting clove polyps everywhere. I mean, everywhere. Oh, and then ever since I started adding lanthanum, they're kind of controlled. There are a lot of bald patches where they used to be, and they don't really have been able to take foothold. They're there, but kind of like they say, it's like that cancer that is under control.
Yeah, it's in remission, but it's still there.
And I don't know why. Maybe that's something that you want to test with it, but there was something about lanthanum that does it. I stopped using lanthanum because I ran out of it. And then you could see within a few days, they're starting to come back up.
See, I thought that they would come back. There's not a Sarcothelia anywhere in the 600-gallon system now. Because it used to be, wow. They weren't bad in the big 500-gallon tank because the Regal Angel, I watched him pick them and eat them. Mm-hmm. But that was, he can only get to the one get to, obviously. If they would start growing back into crevices. So some of the rock, I thought it was, I also had a battle with this weird pink coralline algae, and I thought that was coralline algae, but it wasn't. It was this nasty stuff that was like cotton candy that grew up between the branches of the acropores and killed them. I got that under control this summer. That came in on a maricultured piece that I was too lazy to cut the coral off the piece. Now every maricultured piece gets cut off, whether it's encrusted or not, and I start all over again. Because that has gotten rid of a lot of bugs. Because it's amazing how much nasty stuff comes in on that.
Yes, on the plugs. Yes, and I tell that to people. It's like, unless you know exactly where that thing is coming from, you grab that coral, even if it's encrusted, you snip it, throw the plug, dip the coral, do whatever you need to do with it, and then you put it in your tank. Don't put the plug in there unless you know where it's coming from.
Yeah, do not put the plugs in your tank. I learned that the hard way last summer.
Yep.
It took 3 months, and I probably lost half a dozen corals because I'm thinking it's coral and algae, but when it took off, it was everywhere.
Well, when it's small enough, it looks kind of cool, and you're like, "Oh, this is great," until
Yeah,
it grows, and you're like, "Wait."
nice. You want no? That's what you need. I'm going, oh, this is really not. No, it was the nastiest algae I've had in the tank in a long time.
Well, remember in the old days when we used to get live rock, like real live rock?
Real live rock that had everything in the world in it.
It had the good and the bad.
I had a friend get 1,200 pounds of it to do his 1,500 tank. He got a blue ringed octopus in it that lived.
Oh, well, yeah. I used to work. It's like being here in Chicago. I'm pretty much. I was 30 minutes away from Harvard Aquatics, and back in the day, Harvard Aquatics, Joy at Harvard Aquatics was one of the biggest importers of live rock. And I used to go down there and help her clean the rock and do things. And the things that when the shipments would come in, and the rock was put on the garage, and you open the rocks, and then you grab the rock and sort it out, clean it, scrub it. The stuff that you would find fish that made it, that would make it through.
Yeah. We found little dwarf moray eels. We found all kind of damselfish. There was a guy that used to drive up the East Coast. He would drive a school bus down to Florida with big vats and power heads and air stones. He would bring back 1,000 pounds of live rock. You'd tell him when he was going down, he'd stop by your house and he'd drop off 200 pounds of live rock. Literally, it was underwater the whole time. The stuff that came in on that was amazing.
Yeah. I do miss and don't miss those days, because the stuff that we used to see there back then was awesome.
There was a lot more interesting things. Now it's all the same stuff. I mean, I very rarely see anything rare or unique, particularly I mean, it's all pretty much the same now.
Yeah. I mean, cleaning the I remember getting, when you get the rock, you put it in the tank, and all of a sudden you hear it.
Yep.
And you're like,
nail shrimp.
And it's like, what the hell? And then you would spend the rest of the time trying to figure it out and try to, or the
shrimp.
Yeah, no, the shrimps, but also the crabs, the bad crabs, the crabs. Oh my God, those were all the time, every time, and you trying to catch one of those, with screwdrivers or anything that you needed to.
And one night I saw a crab. It was as big as the palm of my hand, and it was out there trying to catch fish out of the water.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, but that was the cool thing. There was a reason why we all 20 years ago would sit at night with a red light and just stare at the tank.
Kind of crazy stuff. You come out of the then you don't see that anymore.
No, all you see is bristle worms. But back in the day, you would see all this.
That's the other thing. The fendabenders all killed. I kind of realize how many bristle worms I had in the Goniopora affiliate tank, but from feeding it 3 times a week, there had to be a couple thousand little tiny bristle worms. It killed all of them. I had to go in and siphon it out like a vacuum cleaner. The amount of dead worms I got, and the smell of dead worms. They died right away. They were dead the next morning.
Oh yeah, I mean they're usually the first ones to go out. Little brittle starts to everything, all the little stuff. I mean the vermitid snails, I could use that to kill some of them right here, but because they're annoying. But other than that, it's just
worms, which was interesting because I didn't realize from feeding the affiliates, these bristleworms were going into the stomach guts and irritating the affiliates to try and get food out of them. But since I've killed them, the affiliates have just gone
nuts.
The
affiliates are fun.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I again, going back to the live rock, open, at nighttime, and you would see bristleworms like yay big and also thick. And you're like, oh, I'm not going in there and grabbing that stuff,
Well, in my old 1,200-gallon tank, when I was dismantling it, I took out a piece of PVC pipe because I had everything built on pipe, and I hear this scratching sound. So I go and pull the pipe back, and I look, and I hear something coming. I throw the thing. It's a bobbin worm coming out.
Oh!
I screamed like a little girl. I almost had a heart attack. This thing would have bit or done whatever to me. This thing was in a 1-inch piece of PVC pipe, and it was filling the pipe. Oh, it was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in all my years in the hobby. That's as close as I've come to having a heart attack in this hobby.
It was a scene out of Tremors. Remember back in the late 80s?
Oh yeah, that's what it was. That's what a hobbit worm is. That's what they based it on.
Yeah, the tremors. Oh my God.
A mouth and a
Yeah.
digestive tract. That's all this thing is.
Ooh, it's like something out of from outer space.
I will never forget that as long as I live. That I didn't put this thing close to look at it. That I held it back. That I knew it wasn't something good. One time I was smart.
You're still alive to talk about it.
Yeah. How did Mike die? Bristleworm bit him right in the eye. That would have been it. That's not how I want my obituary to be.
No, 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 no. Well, I also know that, going back to several things in the year of good and the year of bad. I also heard, or well, I was there when you got an award for MASNA of the year, didn't you?
It wasn't. It's basically a lifetime achievement for doing it. Yeah, I was very honored to get it. A lot of great people have gotten it before, and I was touched to get it. It meant a lot. It's something I enjoyed, something I've been passionate about my whole life. To get an award for is something you never expect. So it was a great evening, and I mean, it was great seeing all the people there. That's the thing I miss about not having been to shows for a couple of years because of COVID is seeing all my old friends. I mean, because when you look at your friends you've had for a long time, basically it's because
Mhm.
you share something. So I've shared a lot with people like Sanjay and Julian for the past over 30, almost 40 years in some cases. And when I look at new friends I've made now, I've made very few new friends over the past 10 years because I don't share that much with them. But for people I've shared at the beginning, I mean, that's what was nice about the shows. I always enjoy seeing my old friends, and we commiserate and share our experience, share what our successes, and share our failures, and miss the people that are no longer with us. So it's great to do, and that was what that award meant to me. I got the opportunity to be with my friends more than anything.
Absolutely. It was a lot. It was a great night. I got to say, yes, I've gone to a lot of MAGNAs before I worked in the hobby and when I was just a hobbyist. And I have not gone to a MAGNA dinner in probably 15 or something years. And when I heard that you were the winner, I'm like, okay, I guess I better go. So there was my little bud, my little hiney sitting in a chair and a table because I was there when you accepted. And I got to tell everybody, if you have a chance to watch the video, I don't know if the video is online or anything like that. I'm sure it
I
does,
I don't know if it is
but
either. I don't watch myself once I do something.
your speech was just, it was witty, it was funny, it was honest. I appreciate that. I enjoyed that one. It was not, let me put it this way. I was there and it wasn't because I had to be there. I enjoyed when being there and listening to you in your speech. That was really good.
Oh,
I
thank you
wanted
very
to
much. I
say that to
appreciate
you.
that.
Yeah, no, that was a lot of fun. All right. So we've covered a lot. We actually talked for about an hour and a half so
I
far.
know we have to do this more often. You only get me on once every couple of years. So, there's a lot going on.
Well, you know what? Next time I'll get you is we'll talk about, what we get. Cause I know everybody we said uh Mike and I are gonna be trading corals now. So, maybe the next show is gonna be about what we got, you know.
Well,
And
maybe I'll even have the camera by the big tank, and people can see the big tank, and I'll even show them the LPS tank.
yeah,
I posted
absolutely. We
some
should do
stuff on
that.
Facebook, but I don't post a lot about my tanks because I see them all the time. It's not that exciting for me. So
I
I
know,
like
but it's like,
posting
but everybody
things
wants to
that I
see.
find. Like today, I was I was at my friend's house, and we were sharing a rainbow splice millipora that we got together. And most rainbow splice are green with red, maybe with a little bit of orange. This one is now orange, yellow, and pink with no green. And we have no idea what we did to get it to do that.
That's the fun thing about it. And the great thing about it also is that if you put that coral in another tank, it'll morph into something else.
Well, that's why I brought another frag to stick it in a different tank here
Mhm.
to see what it turns into, to see if it turns green. Because one of the things
Yeah.
to look at is he has his ICP test, I have my ICP test. Our lights are the same. Everything else is pretty close to the same.
Mhm.
Is that what the difference is?
Yeah,
So
I mean, you're getting down to a trace element level. You know,
yeah,
that's what you're
so
getting to.
since that coral can change so much, it's going to be interesting to see what potentially can do it.
What triggered it?
Yeah, because I mean it's
That's it.
still a gorgeous coral, but it's nothing
Absolutely.
like any rainbow splice I ever saw. And I bought it as a green rainbow splice, so I didn't, I wasn't paying $1,200 for a splice flag or a splice frag. but it's now a colony about this big after 9 months. And so we decided to frag it today just to see if it'll be different here than there.
Okay. Well, it'll be interesting. I'll love to see that and see how it goes.
Yeah, because
We'll
that's
do it
one
next
thing
time.
that Sanjay and I always Sanjay always gives me a hard time about this. Is we trade frags all the time. I will go and see his corals, and I go, I want that. He goes, you gave me that. I go, mine looks nothing like yours.
Yeah, I've been guilty about that. Guilty about it because every tank is different. I mean, it's in giving it back, it's brown or blue or something, and it's like, you gave me that. It's like, no, I did not. It's like, yeah, you did. Well, Mike, it's always great talking to you, and I can't wait to talk to you about what we come up with next. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. It's an hour and a half. It's a long time to talk to us about tank geek stuff. So, which is kind of fun. I love it.
Yeah, no, I always enjoy it. I mean, obviously, it's been too long since we do this. Too much stuff because there's a zillion other things we can talk about too. But we can do that the next time.
Yeah, we'll
So
do it at the next
I
time.
enjoyed it, and for all the viewers, happy holidays. I hope you all have a healthy, happy holiday season, and hopefully you get what you want for your reef tanks for Christmas.
Yeah, so everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you like the show, please go ahead and subscribe. Hit that bell button or hit the thumbs up, and you'll be notified whenever we have a show. Or you know what? Just go to YouTube and subscribe. CVtv CoralVue channel, and you'll be notified. We have guests like Mike, and we have guests like manufacturers that come in and explain to us the product. But we always have fun. We always have a good time. And if you have any questions or anything, just let us know. If you have a product that you're having questions with, just head on over to support.coralvue.com, and we'll be able to help you. We also have a great community called CoralVue Cares, where people are willing to share their information. It doesn't matter. Yes, CoralVue is a distribution company and we sell different products, but it doesn't matter. If you have a product, even if it wasn't purchased from us or through us, just come on over and ask. There's a great community of people that are always willing to share. I love the fact that we're using social media for something good, which is sharing information and sharing help. And everybody's very helpful because the number one rule at CoralVue Cares is if you're not nice, you don't need to be there. So remember, just be nice and ask nicely, and you'll get a lot of people to help you out. Even we'll pop up in there and every now and then and help out. So thank you so much for watching. And thank you, Mike. Congratulations on your award. Congratulations on your new old tank. And we'll see you all later. Happy holidays.
Thanks.